things like energy efficiency and how you might, first of all, how important it is it to you in terms of how you develop, look at the Clean Power Plan compliance or on different, state calculus. And then, how are some ways that you may or may not be able to incent it, like Katie was talking about?
Yeah, you mean like how we allocate the allowances? Yeah, that is the biggest, what I'm going to say, most complex issue with respect to an asset-based plan. At least in Virginia, to auction the allowances, we would probably have to go to the General Assembly, is what we believe, and that might not be a viable path forward. However, with respect to, set-asides or how you allocate, I see that as a big political, basically a political decision. That would be, there are many ways to do it. We have the environmental justice people, the poverty people, and they have very good claims with respect to how do you want to distribute the costs here and how do you want to ameliorate some. And if we go to a mass-based plan, that's going to, I'm not really answering your question, Todd, but because I'm not sure I can, because we're not at that point yet as to, where we even think an allocation system would go.
How about just from the standpoint of energy efficiency, just as we look at it in terms of part of the fuel mix going forward, how important is it to you from that perspective as a state?
It is an important factor to consider. We're working with our energy office on that, our Commerce and Trade office on that. To what extent, here again, it's going to get the cost, it's going to get to where we think, the cost of energy efficiency versus other costs are going to be headed. But it's not all about cost, it's also about environmental benefit to our governor as well. So that's going to be the big balancing act we're going to have to do. And, as we go forward either with the Clean Power Plan or with a governor's initiative plan, is how do you balance the least cost to whom, who you allocate the cost to, and how can you do it under an allocation? Is the allocation system the best way to do it? Does that make any sense?
Sure.
I wish I could get into more detail, but it's not at the point.
Oh, that's okay. Jennifer?
Yeah, so I just wanted to make a comment on energy efficiency because it's one of the things that's interesting about the Clean Power Plan trajectory and the potential for zero prices is that you have very little incentive for energy efficiency coming from the Clean Power Plan itself. If you have such low prices, both in a mass-based approach if you have zero allowance prices and in a rate-based approach if you have
me start with Kathy, but I imagine everybody's gonna wanna jump into it. And you can approach this from lots of different ways. Either, obviously as an entity that has ownership of nuclear facility or just from a state perspective in terms of, it's interesting when I looked at some of the different presentations today, and a lot of them had nuclear power just kind of flat, going out to 2050 or 2040, when we see, right now in real time, that's not necessarily happening. And so maybe there's lots of different ways to look at the nuclear issue as it affects Clean Power Plan compliance. So maybe Kathy, if you want to start.
Yeah, it's a tough issue to deal with, being a partial owner in a facility which we do not operate. I think it's very difficult to have an intellectually honest conversation about carbon if you can't talk about nuclear. And I think the United States, from a policy perspective, has not dealt well with the nuclear issue for the last 30 years, basically. How do we address the issue moving forward? I don't have any magic suggestions. I was a little bit disheartened, as we were first dealing with the draft Clean Power Plan and submitting comments, and we were looking at, well, what are renewables getting pre-2013 or not, ultimately, and how are non-carbon resources being treated under the Clean Power Plan. I didn't necessarily anticipate that they were going to both be treated in a negative fashion under the Clean Power Plan. From a company perspective, we've even looked at new nuclear facilities, and we shelved those plans because we don't feel like there's enough sort of intestinal fortitude in the country to move forward with new facilities. I don't have any magic answers. I wish I did, but I think it's something that it's very difficult to deal with on a state-by-state basis. I know New York has now done that, but I really think it begs for national look, and I guess I'll leave it at that.
Or how about regional look? Because we've heard that some of the RTOs are looking at that as an issue, and that FERC may pick it up from that standpoint if the RTOs look at it. Does that seem to make more sense, maybe?
At least it starts, and if we can address the issue in smaller, maybe bite-sized chunks, that's probably a positive.
Others want to jump in on this? Jill?
Yeah, so I'll just say that we need all hands on deck to get as far as we can. And so when we're looking at Clean Power Plan, again, it's about complementary policies too, and it's about looking beyond 2030. And I think the modeling results this morning that showed when you look at a more constrained future, you make different decisions than you do if you're just looking to 2030. That was a very compelling result. That showed a different number, essentially sufficient signals for nuclear to stay online at least longer as we keep the transition process going. So I think that's just one more of these things about keeping a longer term perspective, because if you don't, you might end up with a solution that you weren't otherwise planning for.
Yeah, I'll just add, we're a state that actually has a nuclear unit in the early stages. Dominion wants to build, would like to, as proposed, north end of 3. And I'm not so sure it will, I don't know what the future of it will be, but I'm not so sure it's just a lack of intestinal fortitude, as Kathy said, but it's just so darn expensive. And when Dominion looks at the costs, it's just so expensive. They'd like to go forward with it. They say this is a great hedge for both reliability, for diversity of fleet, for hedging bets on the relicensing of Surrey, North Anna 1 and 2. But when you look at the costs, they're just very, very high. And I can't say that there's a lot of public support for it from what I've seen in the state. Now that could change, but it's on the table, but will it go forward?
Right. And so the question becomes, there's two different issues there. One is any kind of building of new and how that might play into it. The other is what to do with the existing plants that are there, and some of them having economic issues. A lot of times in states that aren't vertically integrated, so there's no rate basing of some of
It
the
makes a big
costs too.
difference whether you're in a regulated or unregulated state. Virginia, they can go forward with those plants, and so far there's been absolutely no cost issue with the existing nuclear plants that they've been operating well.
And the new ones that are being built so far in states that are regulated, that are vertically integrated.
That are regulated, yeah.
Right, right. Katie, I'm sorry, you were going to say something?
Well, so we actually, your utility Dominion owns the largest power plant in New England, located in southeast Connecticut, which is our Millstone nuclear unit. It's about 2,000 megawatts. So, this issue has been coming up across the country. It's come up in Connecticut a bit. Full disclaimer, we don't have the information, before us to suggest that that unit is, on the brink of retirement. It's a very, it's 2 units and they're quite large. But, certainly we've seen this trend, happening across the country, and been watching closely what's been happening in New York. And it's not hard to do the calculation if you look at what the emissions would be if those units hypothetically were to shut down. You'd see, and our back of the envelope was that GHG emissions from the electric sector would increase by about 27% across New England, not just Connecticut. So these are kind of significant issues. When it's more than one, when you have an RTO that spans multiple states, of course, there are, nuclear is a complicated issue from the environmental standpoint. You may have a lot of jobs and tax revenues from the facilities, but they may be located in one state, and then the emissions goal may be in that RTO may be priority of other states. So those add some complications. But I think that again, this gets to in my view, the importance of trying to act with the information that you have, and get your policies in place so that you can at least, you get the benefit of your policy by sending the signal to the market. And one of the big questions I think that the restructured states are grappling with is this intersection between what's the best policy to achieve your emissions goals, and the sort of more classic resource planning, where you're looking at, well, what are the revenue requirements for the different types of units that you need in order to meet that goal, and how do you get banks to invest, or how do you get facility owners to make those decisions to refuel or make capital upgrades or whatever they need. Is the mechanism that you're using to achieve your emissions reductions financeable? Does it provide the certainty and predictability that those units need to stay in that market? And at the core of that is the age-old debate about who should bear those risks: shareholders, ratepayers, right? And so I think that there's a really interesting dialogue going on right now in ISO New England, between the states and NEPL and the ISO about ways we might think about how to accommodate state public policy in our market design. A lot of interesting concepts put forward, tweaks to our capacity market, a forward clean energy market, and a carbon adder clean energy market, if that sounds familiar. So anyway, TBD.
But what you said raises an interesting point, and it also speaks to a different question that was asked from the audience and asked folks to weigh in on. And that's a kind of idea of how long we're planning out, and how long we're planning out, not just in terms of cost and energy mix, but in terms of thinking about compliance going forward. And it was brought up in the morning session too, and kind of if the Clean Power Plan triggers a run to gas in some places, for example, and you start to look at what the targets are going forward to try to hit some of the international agreement levels. Do we also have to be thinking about gas, adding gas on to the system, and what that means for us going forward? Maybe after we're not doing these things anymore and somebody else is, but do we have to be thinking about in those terms too? Downstream.
Well, that was where I started out with my comments at the beginning of the panel, and it's become somewhat philosophical, and I think different entities represented in this conversation naturally have different time horizons. But state agencies, I think, in this group should be expected to have the longest time horizons, so that they're responsibility for planning infrastructure, planning the development of their economies, looking far down the road. And if you think that I think there's sort of a fundamental fork in the road you have to take in your own mind about is climate change a serious problem, and if it is policy really going to address it in your children's lifetime? So yes, I guess there's a maybe there, but it's it seems like yes or no is what most people fall on that. And if it's a yes, there's huge uncertainties. We'll learn a lot more about it. Then you're talking about deep decarbonization, and the question is how do you get there? So I overhear a lot of heated conversations and try to hide from them about the role of natural gas as a bridge too far, or the bridge that needs to be built, and the siting of pipelines is the other ones that people brought up before. And I think we can imagine some expansion of natural gas that can be very helpful during this bridge, but a total swing to an entire natural gas economy brings all sorts of risks for all the players in the room, whether you have a long-term or a short-term horizon. And frankly, I think, if I was going to conjecture what might stop that from happening is that sometime in the next decade, EPA will look at natural gas and say, well, what kind of carbon capture and storage requirements might be required on new natural gas? So natural gas is going to come into some constraints in terms of its unbridled expansion, I think, in the electricity sector anyway. So
how does that affect folks' decision-making now, since those, if you talk about it as a bridge, but those are multi-decade decisions that get made in terms of adding new gas plants at this point in time. So how do we look at that from a state perspective? Mike looks like he doesn't want to talk about that at all.
The joke among state regulators, how far out do you plan? Well, when's your retirement date? So I'm not saying we do that, and luckily, at least in my case, most of these decisions are not made by DEQ, but made by the State Corporation Commission.
What the faction I have to say that I've had, only because I've had this interview more than once by someone associated with a company, the answer to that question is, when do your kids get out of college? So that's what I mean by they're looking at
My kids are in preschool, but but in a deregulated market, of course, we're not directing, right? It's who's showing up in the capacity
Right.
market, and you've seen, in New England, shift from we were about 25% gas in 2000, now we're about half of our generation coming from gas, and that's been a big contributor to our ability to reduce those emissions. So these issues are not these aren't questions that states are deciding in a resource planning context, but certainly it's coming up in siting, it's coming up certainly with the pipeline infrastructure and even pipeline funding issues in New England. And I think that what I've found lacking is, where there's a lot of discussion about the bridge, particularly when we talk about how we moved away from coal and oil, and we're retiring the last coal plant in Connecticut, just announced that. But there hasn't been a good articulation, or even, I think, really good enough analysis around what the end of the bridge is, because to me it's about, when does storage become, what's your bet about the cost effectiveness of storage? And that's, a lot of complicated, good work there to do on how to knit together all the different revenue streams that you can get from storage, transmission, distribution, generation, and so on, to see when that becomes a competitor, and then at the same time to understand what's the emissions profile of natural gas balancing a system that's 30%, 40%, 50, 70, 80, whatever percent renewable, intermittent renewable generation. There was some discussion earlier around combined cycle units ramping to match intermittent load. I think there's some NREL analysis that's been done on that that's interesting, that suggests you're not seeing too much emissions impact from running those plants in that way. But that's really the information I think it would be helpful for folks to have if we want to have a more, I think, productive discussion around the siting of gas facilities and what the future is of gas, particularly at least in deregulated markets where we don't have stranded cost issues of rate-basing the generation.
There was one quick question. We've got about 5 minutes left, so one quick one, and then a couple that have to do with the patchwork that I want to get to, because we can was for Jennifer and for Martin. And when you talk about costs in terms of presentations, what are you referring to? Wholesale, retail, or cost of allowances, or I know may be different depending on the particular information.
Yeah, so we do have different cost metrics, and there is in the appendix of the Bipartisan Policy Center slides, sort of an explanation of what we're talking about for cost. But in general, wholesale electricity costs, and we're looking at the cost to deliver, to serve load. So it's including fuel costs and capital costs, but we're also, you know, when we're looking at, whenever we're talking about compliance costs, so I had a graph that had the comparison of dual rate and mass and patchwork sort of across some different cost metrics. In those cases, we're also looking at, you know, allowance and or prices and positions in there. And if you were to look at it in an individual state, you'd also be looking at some import-export adjustments as well when you're talking about costs. That's sort of a confusing answer, but it depends on which cost you need. Because
In
there's a
terms
lot
of the correlation between wholesale and retail rates, do you make much correlation there? I know there's no quick way to say that, but
So we don't have any retail prices in our report. I know, you know, EPA has a formula for converting, and some people have used that. It obviously is pretty state by state, and it depends on rate structures in individual states, and it gets kind of complicated. But it's not you know, one for one. I mean, you obviously have your a lot of firm costs that are not moving as much as the wholesale prices. So the retail rate impacts tend to be smaller percentage-wise than the wholesale percent prices, than the movement in wholesale prices.
anything to add to that, Mark?
I think we're doing something fairly similar, and we did not calculate through to the retail prices just to, you know, they weren't going to be terribly large. You have to make a lot of assumptions about how you're allocating the allowances to get those numbers.
And then there were a couple of questions just about the patchwork, and I'll ask you both about it again. So is there any way to generalize what the patchwork does to costs? Is there a way to try to summarize that? Whether it's a lot of, you know, half and half or different mixes, is there a way to generalize